This is The Reality. Hello again, welcome to The Reality, a half-hour talk show talking about the sure reality of real life as found in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. I'm Dudley Anderson, so good to be with you. If you've got a story to tell of what God has done in your life, I would love to hear from you. Do drop me a note by email, if you will, dudley@surereality.net. The Reality is produced by a listener-supported radio ministry, Sure Reality. Please find out more at surereality.net. Today on The Reality, we meet Jonathan Winter, a seasoned missionary. Born in England, Jonathan spent many years serving the Agta tribe in the Philippines, sharing the love of Christ and leading many to accept him as Lord and Saviour. Jonathan studied contemporary missiology at the University of Gloucestershire and holds MA degrees in Intercultural Studies and Contemporary Missiology. He is gifted in cross-cultural communication and ministry. During the Russia-Ukraine war, Jonathan visited Ukrainian refugees who fled the war to Poland. Here he discovered the plight of lives destroyed by the quandary of war.
These people were just like you and I. They literally had fled, homes, careers, schools, loved ones. But what I would say is that something that we don't really think about during these type of situations is actually human trafficking. Sadly, we did see some of that. It was heartbreaking to see the situation that they were in.
I spoke with Jonathan Winter via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan. We're going to be talking about your experiences in Poland, having gone out there during the war in Ukraine and some of the issues and situations that you faced while you were out there. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about your previous work and experience. You're a missionary and you worked in the Philippines for a while. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, my family and I spent 13 years serving as missionaries in the Philippines. And during our time there, we were involved in church planting. We were also involved in tribal mission work among a tribe called the Agta tribe, so a least reached people group that were basically nomadic. And so we helped some local church planters reach these people with the gospel and helped planted a number of churches among this people group. Additionally, we were involved in training and equipping Asian leaders and missionaries for cross-cultural missions in different parts of the Philippines, but also into other parts of Southeast Asia, as well as teaching in Bible colleges. So really, roughly, that was what we did during our time in the Philippines.
Wow, that's quite extensive. You did some tribal work, as you say. Was that unreached people, or were they people that had already perhaps heard the gospel?
The people groups that we were working among were least reached, meaning that there was minimal gospel outreach among them, and basically no churches among them.
Right.
We thankfully, God connected us with a group of local pastors that really had a burden and a heart to reach these people groups. So we sort of just really assisted them through training, through equipping, but also going on mission trips to these people groups with the gospel and conducting evangelistic outreaches among these people groups. And so, as I said, thankfully, as a result, I think around about 4 or 5 churches were then planted among the Agta tribe.
That's incredible. Sometimes it's hard to believe in the 21st century that there are still people groups around the world. And we're talking about the Philippines here. If I think of unreached people groups, I think of the Amazonian region or Central Africa somewhere. Yeah. So how extensive is this? Are there still many unreached people groups?
Yes, there's probably around about 6,000 unreached people groups around the world at this moment in time. When we think about, as you mentioned, when we think about unreached people groups, we tend to traditionally think about people in remote areas. But what we're finding now with globalization and how fluid migration is with people just, crisscrossing the world for various reasons, that people can still be unreached cross-culturally. They may not be unreached in the sense that that they are so distant physically, but they could be very distant culturally speaking, or language-wise can be barriers which prevent maybe some people groups from actually being able to be recipients of the gospel or understand the gospel. We would find today that we could have unreached people groups in some of our major cities around the world, and there's the term now that the new frontier of missions is actually the big mega cities across the world, the concrete jungles. There are still significant numbers of unreached peoples today.
Dark central New York City, for example.
Yes.
The work, I view the work that you did in Poland with the Ukrainian refugees as missionary work. But just thinking about traditional missionary work, as we're talking about, are there still traditional missionaries in the 21st century?
Yes, there are still those that feel very much called to go to other places in a full-time capacity and serve in different capacities as church planters, as evangelists. But I think today it's more of not just going in as pioneers as such, but actually going to work alongside as partners with the national churches and working as equal kingdom workers rather than sort of being the initiators, if you know what I mean, and being the pioneer as such, because the church is global and God is raising up a global church. And, missions today isn't from west to the rest. It is mission from anywhere to everywhere. And I believe that, more and more missionaries are understanding and appreciating the importance of actually working alongside the national church as equal partners.
Right. We just spoke about, deep, dark central New York City or London or some of the big cities of the world. It's been said that previously evangelized nations are now sending missionaries back to the sending nations. Is this your experience?
Yes. One thing that we have, since returning back to Europe is actually how that Europe is in great need of re-evangelization and need missionaries among us, and need missionaries here in the UK as well. And what we're finding is that a lot of Christians, as you mentioned, in countries that were once evangelized by Western missionaries, are realizing the need to bring the gospel back to the countries that were once where the gospel was once sent from. And so there are many Latin American missionaries in Europe, African missionaries, and Filipino Christians that may have come for work, but then realize that there is a need to be able to, for the preaching of the gospel once again and mission work in Europe. So we are seeing that sort of trend, and I think also it's important for the Western church to realize that there's a great need for the gospel to be preached once again in our continent and across our continent, that we do need help and that we can learn a lot from our brothers and sisters from other parts of the world that have come to Europe.
Wow. We see many indigenous churches popping up, in these developed nations and countries and cities. Is there a place for immigrants to stick together in church, or should they integrate with the cultures that they've immigrated to?
It's a challenge. It's quite a complex situation, because I think, what we have found, like when I went to Hong Kong, there were expat churches, because people could speak the same language. But at the same time, there is, I think, a need for greater integration. But I think it is a matter of both sides of appreciating that we come from different cultures and that we can learn from each other, that it's not one fits for all type of thing. I'm reminded of Revelation 7 and 9, where the Apostle John had the vision of the throne room of God, and he saw in there people from every tribe, language, and tongue worshipping the Lamb of God. And I think that is God's vision for his church. He wants his church to be to be together, if you know what I mean, and that diversity, cultural diversity in that sense, is celebrated together. And I know that from my own experience, that my Christian journey has been so much more colourful when I've been able to experience being with Christians from other countries and from other cultures. Being able to learn different aspects of Christianity from a different cultural perspective. So I think there's a place where there is need for greater integration, but at the same time where there's an appreciation of different cultural backgrounds, if you know what I mean.
I can certainly see that. Yeah. Now, Jonathan, you're no longer in the Philippines. You're based now in Northern Ireland. What do you see as your main thrust of ministry these days?
I think it's more in the area of mobilization and equipping. My wife and I are very sort of passionate about to see Christians that have come from, let's say, from the Philippines and other countries and find themselves in Europe or find themselves in the West, to help equip them to be cross-cultural missionaries in their host country, but also to help raise awareness among the Western church that cross-cultural mission isn't just about going to a far-flung place, but that cross-cultural mission is very much can take place on our own shores, if you know what I mean, and that there is a need also and a responsibility that we're not just concerned about reaching, let's say, Filipinos or Africans or Latin Americans in their own country, but we need to be engaging with them in our own country as well, and receiving them and making them feel welcome, but also being able to reach out to them and make disciples among the nations that have come to us.
Yes, absolutely. As the Great Commission in Acts says, going to all the world, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And the ends of the earth are coming back to Jerusalem these days. Yeah. Wonderful stuff. Jonathan, we've been chatting quite a lot about your missionary work. I'm going to ask you about your trip to Poland after this.
You're listening to The Reality, produced by Sure Reality, a listener-supported radio ministry. We depend on the generous gifts of our listener to produce this program. You can help reach millions of folks with the sure reality of the message of Jesus by becoming a Sure Reality Vision Partner. To partner with us, please visit the website surereality.net and click on Become a Vision Partner.
Hello, if you've just joined us, my name is Dudley Anderson. It's so good to be with you as we just chat about a life touched and changed for good by the reality of Jesus Christ. The Reality is a half-hour talk show. We'd love to hear from you. If you've been listening up today and you have some questions, I'd love to answer those questions or perhaps point you in a direction where you can get those questions answered. Please write to me by email, if you will, dudley@surereality.net. Well, today on The Reality, we're speaking with Jonathan Winter, a missionary and cross-cultural minister. Jonathan has told us how he was involved in church planting and support work among the Agta tribe of the Philippines. Jonathan was conducting outreach and evangelism as well as offering support to the local church groups to reach these people with a message of faith and hope and love as found in Jesus Christ. Jonathan has also helped us to understand how important it is for us as Christians to understand the cultural norms of people who live in cultures unlike our own, so that we can share the love of Jesus appropriately with them in a way that they can assimilate the message of Christ into their own cultures. Missionary work is still very, very viable and an essential calling in the 21st century. Jonathan Winter, always on the lookout for opportunity to offer help and the love of Christ, was greatly impacted by the plight of Ukrainian refugees during the Russia-Ukraine war. The majority of these refugees of this war ended up at the border between Ukraine and Poland. Jonathan sensed the nudge of God's Holy Spirit to visit this region and to offer aid and support to these suffering families. Let's find out more as I ask Jonathan to tell us why he chose to go.
At the outset of this conflict, I just had this burning desire, to be able to go and just to help assist in some sort of practical way. The church that we go to here in Belfast, Every Nation, they have 7 churches in Ukraine, and the Every Nation network of churches across the world set up a relief fund to actually help assist with the relief efforts in Ukraine and on the Polish-Ukrainian border. But I just had this desire that, to go. So I had just sent a message to the pastor saying, look, I just really feel that the Lord wants me to go. And then the next day I received a phone call saying, look, the leadership of the church feel led to send a small team to be able to go, and to help assist on the Polish-Ukrainian border, bringing, relief and so on. And one of the sort of core values of the Every Nation family of churches is that, believe that the church is called to be socially responsible. And I think, the scriptures talk about how we are called to be socially responsible as well. And it was amazing how God just brought everything together, because from the time that I felt that the Lord wanted me to go, and then God called a small team of us from Every Nation Belfast to go, I think it was a matter of within 2 weeks from that initial call, we were actually on the ground. And it was just amazing how God brought provision in to cover the travel expenses, but also to be able to purchase relief goods and food and so on for actually when we were there to give to those that were coming across the border. So, so there was 4 of us that went to Poland. And to be honest, we didn't really know, in these type of situations, you don't really know what to expect. But thankfully, the Lord led us to the places that we needed to go to and to help serve.
Wow. It's profound. How bad is the situation in Poland?
It's it's pretty bad in the sense of the volume of people crossing the border. What we found with the border we went to, we actually went across into Ukraine, and on the Ukrainian side, the authorities, the border guards would only allow maybe 100 or up to 200 people at a time across, to be able to go to the Polish border and then cross through into Poland. And so many of them would have traveled maybe for days, whether that be by car or by bus or by train, or and because of the volume of traffic queuing to get across the border into Poland was huge, because you had maybe people coming back that had dropped off relief goods in places like Lviv and other places. You had coaches of refugees. I mean, the queue, the traffic queue to the border was probably maybe kilometers long. Maybe several kilometers long. So people would actually walk for several miles just to get to the border. And then they would stand around, they would have to wait standing for, hours in the cold, just to be able to, before it got to their turn, to be able to cross into Poland. And mainly, the people were mainly mothers with children, elderly people, or parents or male parents, if they were, let's say, the only sole parent of a child, or, were exempt from military service. And so they would stand in the cold for hours. So, we would be involved in helping to give, warm, hot cups of tea or coffee, handing out food, that sort of thing. Many of them would only have one piece of luggage each. There were elderly people that struggled, because to get from the border gates up to the Polish to the sort of the passport hall was probably about 600 meters at the particular border that we were at. And, the road was those potholes, and there were elderly people that were struggling to actually walk that distance. There was one elderly man that was in a wheelchair, and he was trying to push himself, up this hill to the passport hall. So we helped him, and so on. And so it was quite heartbreaking. And I think for these people, when we think about refugees, we tend to think about people, that maybe don't have much, or, come from a famine-stricken country or something like that. But these people were just like you and I, if you know what I mean. They literally had fled, homes, careers, schools, loved ones, family, and so on. So it was heartbreaking to see the situation that they were in.
Because essentially they don't want to immigrate. They don't want to move from their homeland. Yes?
Yeah, that's right. Majority of them don't want to leave. And actually what we saw was that when people had crossed the Polish to the Polish side, they would be bused to these sort of big hubs. So the Polish authorities, I would say, have done very well. The Polish people have been very hospitable in receiving the Ukrainian people, and so the Polish authorities had basically transformed big shopping centres into reception hubs, where initially Ukrainian people that were fleeing could go to these places, get food, be able to lie down on a camp bed or something, and try and sort of figure out where they were going to go on to next. And they could only stay in these hubs for about 24 hours before they had to move on. But many of them, if they didn't have relatives, let's say in Poland or other parts of Europe, didn't know what was going to happen. It was probably a harder situation. So we actually saw some Ukrainian people actually cross back over into Ukraine, and one of the families that we met, they had relatives in Sweden, so they were actually trying to get to Sweden, and thankfully they did get to Sweden. But again, I think they've left their husbands, their fathers, brothers maybe back in Ukraine, and they want to obviously go back when it's safe to do so.
Did you get any stories? Anybody share with you their whole story of trying to evacuate?
Little bits, but it's all the same. What we saw was just people that were just tired, people that were tired, people that were emotionally drained, and there were some children that were just distraught, just crying, obviously missing their father, missing, not understanding what was happening. And we just saw people that were just tired, but the children really, their faces sort of shone when when we gave them like little soft toys, or we gave them a packet of juice, or some snack, it sort of made them smile. But what I would say is that something that we don't really think about during these type of situations is actually human trafficking.
Yes,
and we sadly did see some of that, which was very, very heartbreaking. Two of our team members at one of the reception hubs that we had were volunteering at, they had gone outside, and they came across these two young children, maybe no more than 4 or 5 years old, and they were just wandering around on their own. And so one of our team members was like trying to ask, where's your parents, where's your mum, where's your grandmother? And they said our mother was taken away in a car at the border. And so we tried to find somebody that had authority that could help in the reception hub, but we couldn't find anybody. And then thankfully, I think it was someone from UNICEF or from UN that was there, and they had seen us and came to us and asked, okay, basically asked one of our colleagues, what are you doing with these children? They were saying, look, these children are lost. Their mother has been taken away in a car.
Jeez.
We're trying to find somebody that can look after these children and try and sort these children out. And they said, look, we can do that. So that was just one. There was another situation in the same place where we had come across 3 sort of young, suspicious men, and they were standing around the, outside the reception hub all day. Every time we go out, they were standing there. And then later on in the day, one of our colleagues saw these 3 young men walking with back to their car with 2 young ladies, Ukrainian ladies, and put them in the car and drove off.
Oh my God.
My one of the colleagues was able to get the car registration, took a photo of the car registration, went to the police about it, said, look, we think this could be a human trafficking situation. And they got the details. The police said, thank you very much. That evening, that was the time when the police had road checks put in place. But, there were 2 situations that we encountered on that one day. And, just imagine how big the whole human trafficking thing must have been. That was just 2 incidences.
Yeah.
Because another thing that was happening, which people across Europe, were traveling to Poland, going to these reception areas, and willing to take Ukrainian families, single mums, and children back to the various countries where Ukrainians want to go to. And there was no vetting whatsoever. So anybody with a criminal record, with wrong motives, could have easily gone and just picked up, for their own, and we don't think about this during this type of crisis. We just think about what's happening in Ukraine, which is bad, but we don't really think about the sort of shockwaves, if you know what I mean. These type of how the criminal gangs and will sort of latch onto this and use this as to their advantage.
Evil opportunism, dear God, we pray for them. Jonathan, in closing, on Facebook, you're quoted as saying, how little is our effort, how much is our impact? Do you believe you had an impact?
Maybe in a small way. I think by going, it raises your awareness to what's actually happening on the ground. Because I think sometimes when we just see what's on the media, we only get a glimpse. But when you actually go on the ground, it gives you a better understanding of actually what the needs are.
You've done a fantastic job. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today on The Reality. Wonderful speaking to Jonathan Winter today for The Reality. Let me remind you, if you've heard anything today or you have some questions, please write me an email at dudley@surereality.net and we can chat. David Head once said, the church on earth is a cross-eyed church with one eye on God and his heavenly benediction and the other one on the needy world of men. Jesus Christ said, Matthew 25, verse 40, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Inspiring us to give, to serve, to do what God has called us to do, to help humanity and share the love of Jesus where we go. The Reality is produced by Sure Reality, a listener-supported radio ministry. If you'd like to know more about this ministry and how you can become a vision partner, please visit our website, surereality.net. From me, Dudley Anderson, to you, as always, keep walking in the sure reality of Christ.